Good evening, everyone. I'm going to run through and do an edit on a photo that I've put out there that I took on our Caddo Lake workshop and run through my process of how I created that image. And I'll record this, so hopefully I can put it out there as a video for you and you can work your way through step by step and kind of see what I did. I'll talk through each step kind of as I go and each edit that I do. Keep in mind that this is a little bit of a fluid process, and the way I edit one time doesn't mean that the next time it'll come out exactly the same. But I'm going to do my best to go through this so that you can see how you could take an image of yours that's similar to this and get a similar look or feel to your image based on the editing features that I'm using in Lightroom. We're going to use primarily Lightroom, a little bit of Photoshop, but primarily Lightroom in the editing process. As a matter of fact, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure I didn't use Photoshop for any of it. It's the engine behind Photoshop that did the merge, but outside of that, all of the edits took place in Lightroom. So it's not a really complex edit. It has multiple layers of brushes and things like that to get the kind of look that I wanted for this image. You may want something different. And I will tell you that I'm not done with the image. When you see what I came out with in the panorama, I'll talk through a little bit of what I was originally going for and will still get to, but haven't got there yet. But I saw this one opportunity and said, I'm going to try this and see how it comes out. So I'm going to sip my wine and talk you through the edits as I go, and hopefully you'll get something of value out of it. Okay, here are the images that I am going to stitch together. And when I was standing on the boat and looking out across the lake, this particular morning there was a lot of mist and haze and clouds off to the left of even these images in another area. So it was just this wonderful contrast. And in my mind, I was looking at the contrast between these individual trees that were spaced out, which gave some great open area, some negative space, with some color to them. And then the background, you had this distant grove of trees that gave some depth to the image. And I just saw this being a kind of a blown out, bright white with this contrast, and I knew even then I would be kind of accentuating the colors. And my what I was shooting with was my Nikon D850, and I had on a 200 to 500 millimeter f5.6 lens, and I'm shooting at 200 millimeters. I was not zoomed in on the image because I wanted some space around the trees, and so I was at 200 millimeter. My ISO is at 160, and that's a little bright. Obviously, if we looked at the histogram on this, we can see the image is really blown out onto the right. And we talk about Instagram or histograms needing to be, more of a typical distribution curve that you would have in statistics or something, with more of a mountain in the middle and then a little bit on each end. But there's nothing to say from a creative standpoint that you can't ignore that completely and blow something out like I did right here. And on this image, there's a fair amount of dark space. If I click on this one here, look at this. It is just really blown way out to the right, but that's okay. That's what I wanted. Now, my shutter speed is 1/250th of a second. And the typical rule is if you're shooting at 200 millimeters, you're going to want to be at least at 1/200th of a second to get sharp images. And so at 250th, I was fine. I could have shot a little faster. ISO 160 is probably fine for this purpose. This is not an image where it's probably going to be very high detail up close. That wasn't what I had in mind for this image to begin with. Seeing as how I was shooting on this very wide panoramic view, what I envisioned for this was an image that would wind up hanging on a wall somewhere at probably anywhere from 6 to even 10 foot long by 12 inches to 24 inches tall. So I was really envisioning a big sweeping panoramic view looking at this. To be honest, one of the things that really drew me in too was these old duck blinds that were falling apart out here in the distance. And so I really thought, man, I want to do something with these. And the truth is I still will. I was at f5.6, so that's as wide as an aperture as I can get with the lens that I had. But it's still pretty good. I mean, you can see that there's pretty good detail in the trees. Let me see, zoom in here a little bit. For the distance that I was shooting at, I mean, it's got to load here for a second. So you can see now it's done. I can try to zoom in a little more. And, is it great resolution? No, but I don't see this being something printed on metal necessarily with, up close to it. Although if you scale it down to this size, it might very well pass scrutiny at that level. I mean, if you zoom in on the duck blind, you can see the individual, the grids and stuff on there. So it's not too bad for the distance that we were at. Okay, so let's go back and look at this overall. As you can see, I've overlapped this image. These trees are right here on the right third, then they're right here on the left third, then they're just off the edge, and this tree has now moved from the right third to the left kind of third, and now to the edge, and so forth and so on. So I try to get an overlap of about a third of each image overlapping the one next to it. Again, I took this handheld and literally, pointed my camera out that direction and went click, turn slightly, click, turn slightly, click, turn slightly, click, turn slightly, click. And now what I'm going to do, one thing to note is that, and I do this with all my images once I've imported them, and these are copies. You can tell by the little corner right here. For those of you that are new to Lightroom, this little corner tells you that this is a copy of the original. But in the develop mode, one of the first things that I do is go in and under lens corrections, you want to check remove chromatic aberration, and you want to enable profile corrections. And you want to do that because if I turn that off, see how the image adjusts just a little bit. Now, when you're shooting with a very long lens, 200 millimeter, 500 millimeter, something like that, that profile correction is going to be pretty minimal. However, if you're shooting with a wide angle lens, it can be pretty dramatic, that profile correction. And if you're trying to stitch together in a panorama, whether it be a vertical panorama or a horizontal, you're going to want to enable profile corrections before you do your panorama, your stitching together using the merge in Lightroom, so that things line up a little better. Without it, you get these little distorted areas where they can't quite line up things, and so you're going to want to do that. All right. So let's go back to, actually what I want to do is I'll bring up the film strip down here. And I'm going to go ahead and I think move this out of the way. And we're going to select all of these down here. And we're going to right click and we're going to go to Photo Merge Panorama. And so it used to be Lightroom didn't have this capability built in. Now it's been, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years ago. It was just an amazing thing that you didn't have to go to Photoshop to stitch things together anymore. And instead you could just use Lightroom. And that's been very powerful. A couple of things to talk about while this is doing its thing. Okay, so cylindrical, if you imagine yourself inside a round room, a cylinder in essence, and you are spinning around looking at the wall in segments. That's cylindrical. Perspective usually works when you are taking a picture of something more vertical. If your camera is horizontal, but you're taking a vertical panorama, and what's at the bottom of the panorama is closer to you than what's at the top, or it's something tall and you're close to the base, and then you're going to turn and tilt your camera up to capture the rest of the image. That's when perspective really comes into play. Spherical is, it's rare that you're going to need that, but if you're shooting ultra wide with a 14 millimeter or something like that, or if you're in a 10 or 11 millimeter with a crop sensor, spherical might give you better results, but you'll have to basically just kind of click through them to see which one works best for you. It'll tell you, hey, I can't merge that file if it's unable to. Let's talk about boundary warp. If we look at these, we can see these white areas right here and right here. And they're not, you can't really tell up here because it's all blown out. What boundary warp does is it just stretches out the image to fill that in. Now, I used to use this a lot, but you have to be careful with it, in particular if you're using wide angle lenses, because the boundary warp can really distort the things on the edges. What I have started using, and this is something new that again Lightroom added a while back, is fill edges. And this is the equivalent of in Photoshop using content aware fill. And so what it does is it just takes a look at what's around those areas and goes, I'm going to try to match what's already there. And that way it doesn't distort what's already in the middle of the image, and instead will just fill it in for you. And you may or may not want that. It may or may not be something that you feel like, oh, yes, I need those areas filled in, or you might say it doesn't matter, I'm going to crop those out. But you can see it did a pretty good job of filling that in so that it all matches. Couple other things, auto crop, if you turn that on, if you didn't fill the edges and hit auto crop, it's going to automatically crop out those light edges. I never do that. I don't want to do that. I've never used auto crop. The other thing is auto settings. Auto settings will it'll take your image after it's stitched together and will automatically apply its own adjustments to the image. Again, that is something I never do, and primarily because what I'm looking for is my own touches on this image, my own impression of what I took the picture of, my own efforts to get it to this is what I envisioned when I took the image. And then create a stack. Now what that does, and you'll see when I merge this, is it just stacks all of the files. It's going to stack them all together and put the panorama image as kind of like the top. And that's good. So if you've got, several hundred images or 1,000 images, in particular, I do a lot of panoramic images, because I like selling large work. I like large prints on for commercial purposes and things like that. So I do a fair amount of it, and it just helps because it takes and it gives you one image to look at, which is the combination of all the images underneath it, and that's a very efficient way to display what it is you've done. You can always easily go in and unstack them by right-clicking on the image, and one of the options you get is stacking, and you can click on that and go unstack, and then it'll spread them all out again so that you have visibility on all of the images that were used in the panorama. Okay, so here we have our image, the stitched together, and just looking at it, I've got captured all the image, or all of the area that I was looking at on the boat, and I've gone beyond it to the left and right to give me room to kind of determine where my final crop lines are. I obviously probably would not want to leave this partial tree over here on this edge, and on this side I've got quite a lot of room between the trees and the end, and I've got this little thing here, but this would be really easy to get rid of. One other thing to note is that with this panorama stitched together, this enable profile corrections is not checked, even though it was checked on all the individual images. If you're shooting with a telephoto zoomed out there at 100, 200 millimeters, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference. You can see it moves just a little bit, but I typically don't re-click this after merging them together, unless I'm shooting with a really wide angle, and then sometimes it helps improve the perspective on the image. So let's go ahead up here and we're gonna crop, and let's just kind of get a feel for what the best balance is on this image. So I want to get outside this tree right here. So we're just gonna move over into there. And then I know if I look at it, we're gonna want to get, inside of this a little bit. This is probably kind of fairly balanced with what I would be looking at for editing that one image, or editing the image that I had in mind originally. And I haven't done that edit yet, but I'm looking at doing that. Right now, though, based on this, I want to focus on this cluster of trees right here. So we're gonna take that edit and let's go ahead and move over and get just beyond that duck blind and kind of see how that feels. And when I'm editing images and cropping them, I may make 2 or 3 edits to the crop to find the one that I feel most comfortable with. So looking at this feels a little bit shifted to the right. So what I'm going to do is probably close this in a little bit. We're getting close to having these main mass areas right here, kind of on that third. We've got this along the horizon there, which is pretty nice, but I already know that I'm probably going to change that. So we're going to go with that. Looks pretty good. At the bottom here, let me go back to this. You can see we've got all of this stuff in the water here, which is honestly is just a distraction. And we're going to have to do some cleanup, but I can get rid of some of it by just cropping out this bottom side. And maybe we'll go right in there. Now, if you're strictly following the rule of thirds and the whole idea of the horizon or the water line or whatever being on that, then maybe, this is not a good idea. But I think it'll work well for what I'm doing, and it just kind of drops those trees down a little bit, and I kind of like that. I like the way that looks. So we're going to go with that as our crop for now. Again, you could probably make several other changes to it if you wanted, but let's use that. And now let's go in, and if you recall from the original image, it had this kind of soft, kind of ethereal type feel to it. And it's kind of accentuating this whole idea of this mist and this kind of foggy atmosphere. And you can get that from 2 different things. So dehaze, when it came out, was great, I thought, because what it did was it would really give me good contrast. If you go the opposite direction with it, it just adds a lot of haze, and that's probably too much. So we're going to reset that to 0 by just double clicking on dehaze. Clarity does something a little similar. It just softens everything, though. Doesn't necessarily add light. Notice that the dehaze, when I move it over, it adds light, and I'm not necessarily looking to add light, at least just not yet. But clarity gives me that kind of soft feel, and I can always add it back in these areas here. I could go in, for example, and just take and use a brush, click on a brush tool, and try to add clarity everywhere, but it's actually a little more efficient to just or what I said earlier was take away clarity everywhere, but with the trees. But it's actually easier to just take clarity away now, and then I can add it back with a brush on the trees. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Might take a little bit of the dehaze and bring it in just to give that kind of foggy look. We want some texture on the trees, so we're going to bring that texture slider up quite a bit. We want some contrast. We want to get those trees to pop a little more. I'm actually going to take the blacks. Let's Let's bring those down a little bit. So we're starting to get some pop. Now, the trees are nice and yellow and orange and a little bit of real bright green. And the sky in the background is also that kind of color tone. And I want to create contrast between that. So what I'm going to do is take my temperature and I'm going to make it a little cooler. And what that's going to do is bring down the overall temperature of the image and give it a little bit cooler feel. Let's take it down to about 4,000 and see what that does to the temperature. And the computer's struggling to catch up a little bit here on the editing. Okay, that's probably too far for what I'm wanting. So let's bump it back up. Maybe go to let's go up around 4,500. I think we shot at about 5,500. But that's getting, there we go. So still not sure that's 100% right, but before I make another adjustment on it, let me get the trees kind of the way I want them. I'm going to add a little vibrance here, a little saturation, and really it's just overall, just trying to add a little bit. Now I can see I'm a little bit green, but I can adjust that up here later if I want to. But let's go in here and let's say, how do we adjust individual saturation? And so one of the things you can do is in the HSL, go to saturation, click on this little spot right here. And now wherever you hold your mouse, you can kind of see there's a little crosshair with a little up and down thing. And so I can go into the oranges, for example, and if I hold there and drag it up, you'll see what it does over here. It brings up the orange. It brought up the red a little bit. If I was to hold in the green area and go up, it's a combination of yellow and green in that area. And that's okay because it's increased the saturation across the image. I can always come back up here and cool off a little bit because it's got a little warm. So let's take it back down about 4,300 and see if that helps eliminate some of that kind of overall yellow cast of the image. Boy, my computer is struggling to keep up. Okay, that's better. That's better. I kind of like that. I could take this and take my magenta up just a hair. Let's see if I can do this. Here we go. I'll just add about 5 to the magenta. Okay. Now the trees are a little bit dark on the shadows, but I'm okay. It's not that far off, but I still want to add a little more texture. So let's use a brush, and what I want to point out to you with the brush is double click. Once you've started the brush, I always double click on effect because it retains whatever brush settings you had before. It retains them, and if you start brushing, you're going to start getting a weird look. So I just always click on effect. What I'm wanting to do is click on auto mask, because when I paint on these trees, what I want to do is impact those areas that are the tree and not the areas that are bright white. And this auto mask will help that a lot. Is it exactly precise? In this situation, no, it won't be. There's too many fuzzy areas with tree branches and little bits of moss and leaves and everything. So especially zoomed out this far, it's not going to be precise, but it's going to be preciser or more precise than if I didn't have it checked. Let's talk about flow. Flow is on 100% and density is 100%. So flow is the speed or the amount that you're applying with each stroke. Density has to do with how much paint is on your brush. And I'm probably more aggressive with this than most, and I leave my density at 100%. In this case, I'm going to leave my flow at 100%. But there are times when I will have my flow down low and maybe density at 50% and flow at 25%. when I'm trying to make really minute changes to light or darkness, and that's typically when I'm editing like portraits. But in this case right here, we want the auto mask on, and what we're wanting to do is add more texture to the areas that we're gonna paint in. We're maybe going to add just a bit of exposure, not much. We want sharpness and maybe even a little bit more saturation. And so we'll take the brush and we'll just start painting in this area. And what it's going to do is just increase the brightness and the color saturation in these tree areas. And it's literally just kind of painting on light, and it's kind of that basic. Now the thing I like about this is, as I'm painting this on, I know that once I get done painting it on, and I'm actually going pretty fast here. I think on my other image I took quite a bit more time and kind of worked my way through, and that might be something that you decide, you might need to take a little more time with something. But once I've got this kind of painted, and I'm moving pretty fast, as I said, and get this done. All right, once I've got that painted on, now I can go in and I can change that. If I want to add some clarity, you can see it kind of brought up some of the bright areas. If I wanted to actually dehaze just those areas of the trees, it adds a little bit more, darkness and intensity to it. So we certainly don't want to do that. That's too much. It's overdone. But I think from what I've done here, you kind of get a sense of kind of how this works. I'm just going to see if I bring up the shadows a bit and see how that works. So you can adjust your deal. Now obviously I've got something going on here. Probably the machine sometimes assumes that your mouse button is clicked down when you drag across. But the way to fix that is hold down the Alt key. Notice that my cursor changes from a plus to a minus. And now as a minus, I can come in here and I can paint these areas and they will go out. So any areas that I've got painted that I go, you know what, I really don't want that effect in those areas, I can simply take and use the Alt key with the brush to eliminate those spots. And it makes a difference. Just looking at it, like this area right here doesn't look good with that in it. So you just adjust things as you go and get something that looks the way you want it to. So is that, exactly like the other image? No, but I think what I've just showed you gets you a little bit better of an idea of, all right, how can I get this really contrasty feel, or how can I get that very ethereal feeling to an image, something that looks more like a painting almost than a photograph. And hopefully this has kind of helped you walk through that. There are other things that we could be doing. I'm not going to get into all of those on this. I just wanted to keep it as a simple edit. This may not, as I said in the beginning, look exactly like the other image that I posted, but most of these steps that I've gone through are the exact ones that I used when I created the other image. So hopefully this helped, and I will be preparing a couple of others and sending out a live Zoom invitation to the group a little later. Have a great evening.